In the heart of a struggling farming community where drought has left fields barren and hopes withering, Jacob Miller makes a choice that will ripple through generations. Despite his own empty pantry and mounting debts, he spots a blind boy sitting alone by the dusty roadside, hunger evident in his thin frame. Without hesitation, Jacob shares his last loaf of home-baked bread and a bowl of vegetable soup, a simple meal that would become the cornerstone of an extraordinary legacy. What Jacob doesn't know is that this small act of kindness has caught the attention of someone powerful enough to transform not just his life, but the entire community. Could this weathered farmer's compassion be the key to unlocking a future bigger than his wildest dreams? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The old pocket watch in Jacob Miller's weathered hands kept erratic time, its brass case worn smooth from generations of worried thumbs. Dawn hadn't yet broken over the eastern fields, but Jacob was already awake, studying the timepiece as he did every morning. His father had passed it down with words that echoed through the years. Time's like the seasons, son. You can't rush it, can't slow it, just got to work with what it gives you. These days, what time gave Jacob was mostly worry. The drought had stretched into its second year, turning his once fertile 100 acres into a patchwork of dust and dying hopes. From his position on the front porch, feet propped on the railing his grandfather had built, he could see the withered corn stalks standing like pale ghosts in the pre-dawn light. Sarah's footsteps whispered behind him, followed by the gentle touch of a coffee mug against his shoulder. His wife of 23 years knew his morning rituals as well as she knew her own heartbeat. "The kids are still sleeping," she murmured, settling into the chair beside him. Though Emma was up late again, working on college applications, Jacob's chest tightened at the mention of college. Their savings, once earmarked for their daughter's education, had been steadily depleted by failed crops and emergency repairs. The latest bank statement lay folded in his pocket like a guilty secret, its red ink numbers burning through the fabric. Inside, the farmhouse creaked with familiar sounds. The ancient refrigerator's persistent hum, the settling of floorboards that had supported 3 generations of Millers, the distant crow of their last remaining rooster. Jacob moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, gathering what he needed for the day ahead: a thermos of coffee, 2 slightly stale biscuits from yesterday's batch, and his father's old ledger. Young Thomas, their 12-year-old son, appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in his work clothes. The boy had his mother's gentle eyes, but Jacob's stubborn determination. "I can skip basketball practice today," he offered, reading the worry lines on his father's face. "Help you with the irrigation pipes." Jacob managed to smile, ruffling his son's hair as he passed. "No skipping practice, buddy. Your team needs you." He wouldn't let the farm's troubles rob his children of their childhood, not if he could help it. The morning unfolded like so many before it, checking the irrigation system, nursing the ancient tractor through another day's work, calculating and recalculating how to stretch their resources just a little further. But today, the pocket watch seemed heavier in Jacob's pocket, its irregular ticking a reminder of his father's other favorite saying, "The land knows how to wait, son. Question is, do you?" By mid-morning, the sun had burned away any trace of dawn's promise, leaving only the harsh reality of another scorching day. Sarah found him near the western field around noon, bringing a sandwich and news from town. "Mrs. Henderson at the market asked about eggs again," she said, settling beside him on the tailgate of his pickup. "Says her customers miss our special brown ones." Jacob nodded, remembering the thriving flock of heritage hens they'd had to sell off last spring. Another piece of their farm's identity sacrificed to survival. "Maybe next year," he said, though the words tasted like dust in his mouth. Emma was at the kitchen table when they returned, college brochures spread before her like a map to an uncertain future. Her mother's determination showed in the set of her jaw as she studied scholarship applications. "Dad, I've been thinking about that work-study program at the State University." "We'll find a way," Jacob interrupted gently, unable to bear the thought of his daughter scaling back her dreams. He pulled the pocket watch out, its warm brass catching the afternoon light. "Your grandfather used to say that timing is everything. We just need to trust in that a little longer." As evening approached, Jacob made his final rounds of the property. Near the old oak tree that marked the property line, he paused to wind. The pocket watch, a ritual his father had performed in this same spot countless times before. The setting sun painted long shadows across the fields, transforming the struggling crops into something almost beautiful. Back on the porch, Sarah waited with 2 cups of evening tea, a tradition they'd maintained through good harvests and bad. "The kids are worried about you," she said softly. "They see more than we think." Jacob settled into his chair, the pocket watch a familiar weight against his heart. "They're good kids, strong kids." He managed to smile. Must get that from their mother. As darkness settled over the farm, the watch ticked on, marking time in its own imperfect way. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own choices. But for now, in this moment between day and night, Jacob allowed himself to believe that his father had been right, about timing, about patience, about the wisdom of waiting for the seasons to turn. The red-stamped envelope arrived with the morning mail, its official letterhead visible through the thin paper like an accusation. Jacob stood at the end of the gravel driveway, other bills and circulars forgotten in his hand, staring at the bank's logo as though it might somehow transform into something less threatening. "Final notice," declared the bold text when he finally opened it, the words stark against the white paper. The amount past due swam before his eyes, a sum that might once have seemed manageable, but now loomed like a mountain he couldn't hope to climb. 90 days. They were giving him 90 days to make good on years of mounting debt. He folded the notice carefully, creasing it with deliberate precision before slipping it into his shirt pocket. Sarah would need to know, of course, but not yet. Not while she was preparing for her morning class at the elementary school. Humming softly in the kitchen as she packed her lunch. The bank's terms were clear: restructure, sell, or face foreclosure. 3 generations of Miller farming heritage reduced to 3 stark options on crisp white paper. Jacob's father had weathered the farm crisis of the 80s, kept the land when others were selling out, but he'd had resources then, crop insurance and livestock to fall back on. Jacob had already sold most of their livestock, and this year's insurance wouldn't cover a fraction of their losses. News traveled fast in small farming communities. By mid-morning, Jacob could sense the whispers following him as he picked up supplies at the feed store. Old Earl, who'd extended them credit more times than Jacob cared to count, couldn't quite meet his eyes across the counter. "Heard the Andersons over in Cedar County just sold to one of them big corporate outfits," Earl said, carefully counting. "Out Jacob's change. Got a fair price, from what I hear. Enough to retire on." The suggestion hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Jacob pocketed his change, remembering how his grandfather used to say that a farmer without land was like a bird without wings. "I appreciate the thought, Earl," he said quietly, "but the Millers aren't done farming just yet." Outside, the summer heat pressed down like a physical weight. A strange car was parked near the grain elevator, sleek, black, and expensive-looking, the kind rarely seen in their small farming town. Its windows were tinted dark, but Jacob could have sworn he saw someone watching him from inside. By the time he looked again, the car was gone. Back at the farm, Sarah was home early from school. The bank notice felt heavier in his pocket as he watched her through the kitchen window, hanging sheets on the line to dry. Some things hadn't changed since his grandmother's time. The rhythm of farm life, the way fresh laundry danced in the afternoon breeze. "I saw Matthew Jenkins in town today," Sarah said when he came inside. "His boy's been sitting by the highway again, just sitting there, for hours sometimes." She paused, folding a dish towel with careful attention. "They say he lost his sight in that accident last year. Such a shame. He can't be more than 15. Jacob nodded, only half listening as he debated how to tell her about the notice. The Jenkins boy wasn't the only one struggling. Times were hard all around, and getting harder. The drought had forced 3 families to sell already this year, their land swallowed up by corporate farms that stretched beyond the horizon. That evening, Jacob sat at the kitchen table long after the others had gone to bed, the bank notice spread out before him like a map of his failures. He'd tried everything he could think of, diversifying crops, taking odd jobs in town, even selling off pieces of equipment they could barely spare. Nothing had been enough. The numbers didn't lie. Between the mortgage payments, equipment loans, and operating costs, they were sinking deeper every month. The drought had just been the final straw, breaking the back of an already struggling operation. A distant rumble of thunder drew his attention to the window. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising rain that would probably miss them again, as it had so many times this season. The weathered face of his father seemed to stare back at him from the glass, disappointment etched in every remembered line. Sarah found him there an hour later, the notice still on the table between them, like an unwelcome guest. She didn't say anything at first, just put on a pot of coffee and pulled up a chair beside him. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "Remember when the tornado took the barn roof in '95? Everyone said we should take the insurance money and sell then, but we rebuilt instead." She reached for his hand across the table. "We'll rebuild from this too." Jacob wanted to believe her, wanted to believe in miracles and second chances and the power of simple determination. But the red stamp on the notice seemed to mock such hopes, its message clear and final as a slammed door. He carefully folded the notice and put it back in his pocket, where it settled next to his father's watch like a guilty secret. Outside, the first fat drops of rain began to fall. But Jacob knew better than to hope. Summer storms were like bank notices these days. They promised much but delivered little, leaving nothing behind but the bitter taste of disappointment. What he didn't know, as he finally headed up to bed, was that fate had already set wheels in motion. The owner of that strange black car hadn't been watching him by chance, and tomorrow would bring an encounter that would change everything, though not in any way Jacob Miller could have imagined. Jacob spotted him on his way back from town, a solitary figure perched on an old wooden fence post where Miller Road met the highway. The boy sat perfectly still, face tilted toward the morning sun, a white cane propped against his leg. Something about his posture spoke of both dignity and defeat, an odd combination that made Jacob slow his truck almost without thinking. He'd packed a simple lunch that morning, Sarah's homemade bread, still warm when he'd wrapped it, and a thermos of vegetable soup made from the last of their garden harvest. Simple fare, but it had been meant to last him through a long day of fence repairs. Now, watching the boy through his dusty windshield, Jacob found himself reaching for the paper bag. The crunch of gravel under his boots announced his approach. The boy's head turned slightly, tracking the sound with the precise attention Jacob had noticed in other blind people. Up close, he could see that the boy's clothes, though clean, had the worn look of heavy use. His face was thin, but his unseeing eyes held a kind of quiet patience that reminded Jacob of his own father. "Mighty warm day to be sitting out here," Jacob said, keeping his voice gentle. "Name's Jacob Miller. This is my farm you're resting against." A small smile touched the boy's lips. "I'm Michael Jenkins. I hope it's okay that I'm here. I like to feel the sun on my face, and it's quiet here, quieter than in town." Jacob studied the half-loaf of bread in his hands, remembering Sarah's words about Matthew Jenkins's son. The accident had been in all the local papers, a farming mishap that had cost the boy his sight. The Jenkins family had been struggling even before the medical bills. "Getting near lunchtime," Jacob said, unwrapping the bread. The fresh-baked smell rose in the hot air. "I've got more than I need here. Thought you might like to share." Michael's face lit up at the smell. though he tried to hide it. "Oh, no. Sir, I couldn't. My wife Sarah would have my hide if I let anyone go hungry on Millerland," Jacob interrupted kindly. "Besides, food tastes better with company." He broke the bread carefully, the crust crackling between his fingers. It was a sound that spoke of home, of warmth, of generations of farmers sharing what they had. He placed half in Michael's outstretched hands, noting how the boy's fingers moved gently over the surface, mapping its shape. "It smells like my grandmother's bread," Michael said softly. "Before she passed, she used to bake every Sunday." Jacob poured soup into the thermos cap, setting it carefully in Michael's other hand. They ate in comfortable silence, watching, or in Michael's case, listening to, the occasional car pass on the highway. The boy's careful, appreciative way of eating reminded Jacob of his own children in leaner times, when they'd learned young to savor every bite. "Dad says things will get better," Michael said eventually, brushing crumbs from his lap. "Once his new job at the factory starts, but I hear him and Mom talking late at night when they think I'm sleeping, about bills and doctors and—" He trailed off, his face coloring slightly. Jacob thought about the bank notice in his pocket, about Emma's college dreams, about all the weight that parents carry. "Your dad's a good man," he said. "Sometimes life just throws more at us than we can catch at once." A sleek black car drove past slowly, and Jacob felt a prickle of recognition. The same car he'd seen yesterday, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. This time, it continued down Miller Road, dust rising in its wake. "That's Ms. Wells," Michael said, his head tilted. "I can tell by the sound of her car. She comes to check on me sometimes, though she thinks I don't know." "Ms. Wells? Catherine Wells. She's been staying at the old Morgan place, though nobody knows why." Michael's fingers traced the edge of the thermos cap. "She found me here last week. Talked to me for a while. She has a kind voice, but sad, like she's lost something too." The name stirred something in Jacob's memory. A newspaper article maybe, or town gossip he'd only half heard. But before he could chase down the thought, he noticed Michael's expression change, becoming more alert. "There's my dad," the boy said, hearing an approaching engine Jacob's ears hadn't yet caught. "He worries if he can't find me." Sure enough, Matthew Jenkins' old pickup appeared around the bend. Jacob helped Michael gather his cane and stand, noting how the boy moved with careful confidence, despite his blindness. "Thank you for the lunch, Mr. Miller," Michael said, his smile genuine. "And for treating me like normal. Some people, they either ignore me completely or try too hard. You just shared your bread." Jacob watched as Matthew helped his son into the truck, exchanging a nod of understanding with the other father. The half loaf of bread he'd shared seemed like such a small thing, yet something about the moment felt significant, like seeds being planted in fertile ground. That evening, telling Sarah about the encounter over dinner, Jacob found himself wondering about the mysterious Ms. Wells and her black car. He couldn't have known then how that simple act of sharing his lunch would ripple outward, setting in motion events that would transform not just his own life, but the entire community. But for now, watching his family around the dinner table, he simply felt glad he'd stopped. Sometimes the smallest choices, like breaking bread with a stranger, carried a weight far beyond their seeming importance. His father's watch ticked in his pocket as if in quiet agreement. The Valley Herald's front page caught Jacob's eye at Earl's feed store 3 days later. There, below the fold, was a photo of his farm, morning mist rising over the eastern fields. The headline read, "Local farms face drought crisis, Miller. Heritage farm among those at risk." Martha Chen, the paper's veteran reporter, had always had a way of finding stories that cut to the heart of community matters. Her article painted a vivid picture of the region's struggling farms, but it was the middle section that made Jacob's hands tighten on the paper. But even in these difficult times, the spirit of community endures. Jacob Miller, whose family has worked this land for 3 generations, was recently observed sharing his lunch with Michael Jenkins, the teenager who lost his sight in last year's tragic accident. "That's just who the Millers are," says Earl Davidson, local business owner. "Salt of the earth folks, always ready to give, even when they have little to spare." The bell above the store's door chimed as Sarah entered, her teaching bag over her shoulder. She stopped short when she saw Jacob's expression. "What is it?" He handed her the paper wordlessly. Her eyes widened as she read, one hand coming up to cover her mouth. "Oh, Jacob, Martha's made you sound like some kind of local hero." "I just shared my lunch," he muttered, uncomfortable with the attention, but the article had already worked its magic. Throughout the morning, customers came and went, each with a comment or knowing smile. Old Mrs. Henderson insisted on giving him extra coffee beans for being such a good example. Bill Thompson clapped him on the shoulder and said something about remembering what community means. By afternoon, the story had taken on a life of its own. Jacob found Michael waiting at the same spot, but this time the boy wasn't alone. 2 other teenagers from town sat with him, sharing sandwiches and easy conversation. They waved as Jacob drove past, and he noticed how naturally they included Michael in their interaction. No awkwardness or forced sympathy. The paper lay folded on his truck's dashboard when he spotted the black car again. This time it was parked near the Morgan place, just as Michael had said. A woman stood beside it, her elegant posture out of place against the rural backdrop. She was reading what looked like a copy of the Valley Herald. Back at the farm, Emma was excited about the article. "My English teacher read it to our class," she said over dinner. "She said it's important to remember that real news isn't just about problems. It's about how people face them." Sarah reached across the table to squeeze Jacob's hand. "The paper's right, you know, about you being who you are, even in hard times." But Jacob was distracted by something else he'd noticed. In the article, a detail that had nagged at him all day. In the background of the farm photo, barely visible, was that same black car. The timestamp showed it had been taken at dawn, long before most people were stirring. Later that evening, the phone rang, an unusual occurrence in itself. It was Martha Chen. "Jacob, I hope you don't mind the article," she said without preamble. "But there's something else you should know. After we went to print, I had a visitor at the Herald office, Catherine Wells." The name sent a small shock through him. "The woman staying at the Morgan place?" "The same. She had questions about your farm, your family. She seemed particularly interested in your work with local youth programs, which I admit I might have embellished a bit. Sometimes a story needs to highlight the good, you know." Jacob thought about Michael, about the teenagers sharing lunch by his fence. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you're one of the few farmers left who still takes on summer helpers. That your wife teaches kids who can't afford tutoring. That you and Sarah have always put community first, even when it cost you." Martha paused. She took notes, Jacob, the kind of notes people take when they're planning something. After hanging up, Jacob stood on his porch, watching the sun set behind his struggling fields. The newspaper lay on the railing, its pages stirring in the evening breeze. The story of one simple lunch had somehow grown into something larger, drawing attention he wasn't sure he wanted. Sarah found him there, as she so often did. "I saw Michael's mother at the school today," she said softly. "She told me he's been different since that lunch, more confident. He's even talking about learning to play an instrument." "It was just lunch," Jacob protested. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. In small towns, sometimes the smallest gestures carried the most weight. Like pebbles dropped in still water, their ripples could reach shores you never intended to touch. The evening paper delivery truck passed on the main road, adding more copies of his story to the community's consciousness. Tomorrow, more people would read about the Miller farm, about a shared lunch, about the kind of values that had shaped this community for generations. And somewhere, in a rented farmhouse that had once belonged to the Morgans, a woman named Catherine. Wells was making plans that would change everything, though Jacob didn't know it yet. What he did know, watching the last light fade from the sky, was that something had shifted. Like the first hints of rain after a long drought, Change was, well, coming. He just couldn't tell yet whether it would bring destruction or renewal. Catherine Wells stood at her rental home's window, absently turning an expensive pair of Cartier sunglasses in her manicured hands. Through the morning haze, she could just make out the Miller farm's silver silos rising like sentinels against the dawn sky. The glass's golden frames caught the early light, momentarily blinding her with their reflection. "Yes, I'm still here," she spoke into her phone, her tone carrying the practiced patience of someone used to being in charge. "No, I don't need the board's approval for this. It's my money, my foundation." She paused, listening. Sometimes the right investment isn't about spreadsheets and projections. It's about people. Setting the phone down, she moved to her makeshift office, once the Morgan family's dining room, now filled with laptops, files, and preliminary architectural drawings. The sunglasses found their place beside a folder labeled Miller Farm, Potential Site. Their presence was a reminder of yesterday's near mistake when she'd almost lost them while observing Jacob's interaction with her son, Michael. The words still felt strange, even after 15 years. She'd honored his adoptive parents' wishes, keeping her distance, watching from afar as he grew. The accident last year had nearly broken her resolve, but she'd channeled her pain into purpose, using her resources to ensure the Jenkins family had the best medical care, all through anonymous donations and carefully structured charity funds. Now fate had handed her an unexpected gift. Through the simple act of sharing lunch with Michael, Jacob Miller had proven himself to be exactly the kind of person she'd been searching for. Someone who gave without calculation, who saw people rather than problems. Catherine picked up the sunglasses again, studying her reflection in their tinted lenses. The woman who looked back was a far cry from her humble beginnings. Designer clothes, carefully styled hair, the polished appearance expected of a billionaire philanthropist. Yet this morning she'd chosen her simplest outfit, a concession to the farming community she'd been quietly observing. The file on her desk contained everything there was to know about Jacob Miller. Financial records showing mounting debt, property assessments detailing the farm's potential, community references painting a picture of quiet integrity. But it was what wasn't in the file that interested her most, the intangible qualities she'd witnessed herself. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in, Robert." Her assistant entered, carrying fresh coffee and more papers. "The architectural team sent revised plans. They say the existing barn structure could be easily modified for—" He stopped, noticing her distraction. "Is everything all right?" Catherine set the sunglasses down carefully. "Did you know I grew up on a farm, Robert? Nothing like this scale, just a small family operation in Nebraska. When my tech company took off, everyone expected me to forget those roots. Buy a mansion in Silicon Valley, yacht in the Mediterranean." She moved to the window again, watching a tractor, undoubtedly Jacob's, move slowly across a distant field. But you never forget the smell of fresh-turned earth or the way morning light hits dew on cornstalks. You never forget what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. "The board is concerned," Robert said gently. "They think this project is too personal." "The board," Catherine replied, "has never watched their child sit alone by a roadside, too proud to ask for help, only to have a stranger share his last bit of food without hesitation." She picked up the sunglasses, remembered how she'd nearly dropped them in her emotional response to witnessing that scene. Sometimes the most important investments are personal. The morning sun had burned away the haze now, revealing the full sweep of the Miller property. From this vantage point, Catherine could envision it all. The renovated buildings, the accessible paths, the teaching gardens where children of all abilities could learn and grow. A place where her son could find purpose, where his blindness wouldn't define him. "What about the timing?" Robert asked, reviewing his notes. "The bank's deadline is exactly why we need to move carefully," Catherine finished. "Jacob Miller isn't looking for charity. He's not the type to accept help without giving something in return. That's precisely why he's perfect for this. She slipped the sunglasses into their case, the soft click of the closure punctuating her decision. Tomorrow, she would finally meet Jacob face to face. The careful observations, the background research, the strategic planning, all of it had led to this moment. But first, she had one more stop to make. "I'm going to see Michael," she said, gathering her things. "From a distance, as usual. I need to be sure. Need to see again what I saw that day with the bread." Robert nodded, understanding. He'd been with her long enough to know that beneath the polished exterior and business acumen, Catherine Wells was still a mother watching her child from afar, trying to build a better world for him the only way she knew how. As she drove down Miller Road later that morning, the sunglasses sat unused on her dashboard. Today, she wanted to see everything clearly, without filters or tinted barriers. Her son was at his usual spot by the fence, but this time he was reading. His fingers moving confidently across a Braille textbook. More importantly, he was smiling. Catherine touched the brake, letting her car slow almost to a stop. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wouldn't have to watch from a distance, where the walls between mother and child, between wealth and want, between ability and disability, could finally begin to crumble. The sunglasses caught the light again, sending a bright reflection across her vision, like a sign, she thought, or a reminder. Sometimes seeing clearly meant looking past the surface, past assumptions and appearances, to the heart of what mattered. Tomorrow, she would begin to build that future, not just for Michael, but for an entire community. The business card appeared on Jacob's porch at sunrise, propped against his morning coffee mug. Heavy, cream-colored stock, elegant black letterpress printing, and a simple line of text. Catherine Wells, Wells Foundation, followed by a phone number. Below it, handwritten in precise script, "I'd like to discuss the future of Miller Farm. I'll be waiting at the old oak tree at 7 a.m. Jacob stood on his porch, card in hand, watching the sun paint his struggling fields in deceptively golden light. He'd heard rumors about Catherine Wells over the past week, snippets of conversation at the feed store, whispered speculations at church. Tech billionaire, philanthropist, mystery woman. But none of that explained why she'd taken an interest in his farm. The old oak tree had stood sentinel at the edge of Millerland for over a century. As Jacob approached it now, gravel crunching. Under his boots, he saw her waiting there. Gone was the mystery woman in the black car. Instead, Catherine Wells looked almost ordinary in practical boots and a simple blue blouse, her only concession to wealth the elegant watch on her wrist. "Mr. Miller," she said, extending her hand, "thank you for coming. I believe you've been sharing lunch with my son." The revelation hit Jacob like a physical force. "Michael is your—" "Yes." She touched the oak's ancient bark, her expression softening. "Though the Jenkins family has raised him since he was an infant. An open adoption. They're wonderful people who gave him everything I couldn't at the time, including their name." Jacob thought of Michael's gentle manner, his quiet dignity. He saw traces of both in the woman before him. "The accident last year nearly broke me," Catherine admitted. "I wanted to sweep in, take control, fix everything, but that wasn't what Michael needed. He needed to find his own way, his own strength." She turned to face Jacob directly. "Which brings me to why I'm here." From her bag, she withdrew a leather portfolio and handed Jacob another business card, identical to the first but with additional text beneath her name. "Founder, Inclusive Futures Initiative. I've spent the past year developing a concept," she continued, "a network of educational farms across the country, specially designed to serve children with disabilities. Places where kids like Michael can learn, work and grow alongside their peers. Places that combine traditional farming wisdom with modern adaptive technologies." Jacob studied the business card, its weight suddenly significant in his hands. "And you're here because I've been watching you, Mr. Miller. The way you treated Michael, not with pity or condescension, but with simple human dignity. The way you've maintained this farm's connection to the community despite your own struggles. The way your wife teaches local children and your daughter mentors younger students. She gestured at the fields stretching before them. This land has potential beyond crop yields. I'm proposing a partnership. The Wells Foundation would provide capital to transform Miller Farm into our first pilot site. You'd maintain ownership and operational control, but with resources to create something extraordinary. Adaptive learning spaces, sensory gardens, accessible livestock programs. Jacob's mind raced with implications. The bank notice would be addressed, Catherine said carefully. But this isn't about bailing out one farm, Mr. Miller. It's about building a legacy. Your agricultural expertise, combined with our resources, could create a model for similar programs nationwide. She opened the portfolio, revealing architectural sketches that made Jacob's breath catch. The familiar bones of his farm were there, but reimagined in ways he'd never dreamed possible. Raised garden beds accessible to wheelchairs, modified tractors with adaptive controls, a greenhouse complex designed for year-round educational programs. "Why me?" he asked finally. "There are bigger farms, more successful operations." Catherine's expression softened again. "Because last week, when you shared your lunch with a blind boy by the roadside, you didn't know he was my son. You didn't know I was watching. You didn't know about this proposal. You simply saw someone in need and responded with kindness." She touched the business card in his hand. "That's the foundation we need to build on." The morning sun had risen fully now, highlighting the golden embossing on the card's elegant surface. Jacob thought about Michael's quiet courage, about Emma's college dreams, about Sarah's unwavering faith in better days ahead. He thought about his father's words about timing, and how sometimes the seasons brought unexpected harvests. There would be conditions, Catherine continued, requirements for accessibility, educational programs, professional development. This isn't just an investment in land and buildings, it's an investment in people. A truck passed on the distant highway, sending up a cloud of dust. Jacob watched it settle, remembering how his grandfather used to say that good earth never truly belonged to any one person. It was just borrowed from future generations. "I'd need time," he said slowly. "Need to discuss this with my family. Need to understand exactly what we're talking about here." Catherine nodded, unsurprised. She reached into her portfolio one last time and withdrew a third business card. This one was different, printed on simple white stock with only a phone number. "This is my private line. Not my office, not my assistant. When you're ready to talk details, call me directly." She smiled. After all, this is about family as much as business. As Jacob walked back to his house, the 3 business cards felt like chapters of a story in his pocket. The mysterious invitation, the formal proposal, the personal connection, each represented a different facet of Catherine Wells. Each promised a different kind of future. Sarah was waiting on the porch, coffee cup still steaming. One look at his face told her something momentous had happened. Jacob, he placed the cards on the railing between them, watching as she read each one carefully. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "This could change everything," she whispered. "Already has," Jacob replied, thinking of Michael by the roadside, of Catherine under the oak tree, of all the invisible threads that connected their stories. The morning breeze stirred the business cards, their elegant surfaces catching the light like promises waiting to be kept. The farm deed lay open on Jacob's father's old desk, its faded calligraphy telling the story of 3 generations of Millers. Jacob ran his fingers over the raised seal, tracing the date his grandfather had first purchased the land, April 15th, 1947. Below that, his father's signature from 1982, and finally his own from 2003. Each transfer marked not just a change in ownership, but a renewal of purpose, a commitment to the land and its legacy. "Dad?" Emma stood in the doorway of his study, a space that had once been his father's sanctuary. Mum said you've been in here all morning." Jacob looked up from the deed, seeing in his daughter's face the same determination that had driven his father to keep farming through the hard years of the 80s. "Just thinking, sweetheart, about what it means to be a miller." She crossed the room and perched on the desk's edge, something she'd done since childhood. "Is this about Ms. Wells's proposal?" News travelled fast in a farming family. In the 3 days since Catherine's visit, they'd held 2 family meetings, each one circling around the same questions. What would this change mean? What would they gain? What might they lose? "Grandpa always said the deed was just paper," Emma continued, touching the document's worn corner. "The real farm was in the soil, and the people who worked it." Jacob smiled, hearing his father's words in his daughter's voice. "He also said change was like winter wheat. You plant it in one season, not knowing what weather the next will bring." Sarah appeared in the doorway, Thomas trailing behind her. "Family meeting," she announced. Part 3. They gathered around the old kitchen table, the deed now central between them. Thomas had brought his tablet, pulled up the architectural drawings Catherine had emailed. Emma had college brochures and financial aid forms. Sarah had her teaching notes, already filled with ideas for adaptive education programs. "I've been doing research," Emma started. "There's nothing like this in the whole region. The nearest specialized agricultural program for disabled students is 3 states away. We could really help people." Thomas swiped through the drawings. "And look at these greenhouses, Dad. The hydroponic systems would work even in drought years. We could grow year-round." "It's not just about the buildings," Sarah added softly. "It's about creating something meaningful, something that honors what the Millers have always stood for." Jacob studied the deed again, thinking about the men who had signed it before him. His grandfather, returning from World War II with dreams of building something lasting. His father, expanding the operation through sheer determination and dawn-to-dusk work. Each had faced their own crossroads, their own moments of decision. "Michael called me yesterday," Sarah said, drawing Jacob's attention. "Asked if he could bring some friends to visit the farm, children from his support group. They want to feel what a working farm is like." She paused. "They're already looking to us, Jacob, already hoping." The deed's paper had grown soft at the corners from years of handling. Jacob remembered watching his father sign it, remembered the weight of the moment when he'd added his own name. "It's not just our decision," he said slowly. "This farm has always belonged to the community in some way, has always been about more than just us." Emma reached for her phone. "I made some calls. Mrs. Henderson at the market, she's already talking about selling produce from the adaptive gardens. Earl at the feed store says he'd hire graduates from our training programs. Even Reverend Thomas mentioned using the space for youth group activities." The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, catching the deed's official seal. Jacob thought about Catherine's 3 business cards, still lined up on his desk. Upstairs, about Michael's quiet dignity by the roadside, about all the invisible ways their lives had been leading to this moment. "When your grandfather bought this land," he said finally, "people thought he was crazy. Post-war prices were high, and he was just a young man with more dreams than dollars. But he saw something here, not just crops and cattle, but possibility." Sarah reached across the table, taking his hand. "And now we see something too." Thomas looked up from his tablet. "So we're doing it?" Jacob picked up the deed, feeling its history in his hands. "The Millers have always believed in planting seeds for future harvests. Maybe it's time to plant something new." He looked at each of their faces, his wife's quiet strength, his daughter's bright hope, his son's eager excitement. "But we do this together, as a family." Emma was already reaching for her phone again. "I'll call Ms. Wells." "Not yet." Jacob carefully folded the deed, tucking it back into its protective sleeve. "First, we visit your grandfather." They drove to the cemetery in silence, the deed riding in Jacob's pocket like a talisman. The family plot sat on a small rise overlooking the eastern fields. Jacob's father had chosen the spot himself, saying he wanted to keep an eye on future generations of millers. Standing before the headstone, Jacob drew out the deed. The morning breeze ruffled its edges as he read aloud the property's description, the succession of names, the history of their land. Then he shared Catherine's vision, speaking to his father's memory about greenhouses and adaptive equipment, about children finding hope in the soil, about a legacy reimagined but not lost. Finally, he folded the deed and knelt to touch the cool granite. You always said timing was everything, Dad, that we had to trust the seasons. He smiled, feeling tears prick at his eyes. I think maybe it's harvest time. Back home, Jacob reached for Catherine's private number. The card was warm from riding in his pocket, its simple white surface unmarked by doubt. As he dialed, he glanced at the deed one last time. Not just a record of ownership now, but a bridge between past and future, between what had been and what might yet be. The architectural plans spread across the kitchen table like a paper dream, their blue lines promising a future Jacob could almost touch. The head architect, a young woman named Rachel Chen, traced her finger along the barn's proposed modifications. The original structure is perfect for what we need, she explained, adjusting her glasses. These support beams here? They're overbuilt. Your grandfather knew what he was doing. We can easily add the adaptive equipment without compromising integrity. Catherine stood at Rachel's shoulder, while Jacob and Sarah sat opposite them. The morning sun, streaming through the window, illuminated dust motes dancing above the plans, making the architect's silver pencil flash as she sketched quick modifications. The main challenge, Rachel continued, is maintaining the farm's authenticity while making it fully accessible. We want students to experience real agricultural work, not some sanitized version. Jacob studied the section showing the modified tractor controls. These attachments, they'll hold up to actual field work? Tested them myself, Catherine interjected. Had them installed on a similar model last month. Michael, she paused, still careful when mentioning her son. Michael was able to operate it successfully after just 2 hours of training. The plans showed other changes too. Gentle slopes, replacing steps, wider doorways, tactile guidance systems integrated into walkways. But it was the teaching spaces that caught Sarah's eye, classroom areas seamlessly blended into the working farm environment. Look at this greenhouse design, she said, pointing to a detailed cross-section. The raised beds are at different heights for different needs, and these sensory gardens... A truck's rumble interrupted them. Through the window, Jacob watched the first construction vehicles arrive, their yellow bulk incongruous against the pastoral landscape. The sight made his stomach tighten, decades of Miller tradition about to meet modern innovation. Rachel rolled up one set of plans, revealing another beneath. We'll start with the barn today. The foundation team... A sharp crack split the air, followed by the sound of splintering wood. They rushed outside to find one of the delivery trucks had misjudged the old entrance's width, taking out a fence post and part of the gate that Jacob's father had built. I'm so sorry, the driver stammered, climbing down. The turn looked wider on the plans. Jacob felt the familiar weight of his father's pocket watch, ticking away in his jacket. Change, it seemed, wouldn't come without cost. Catherine stepped forward smoothly. Note that access point for widening, she told Rachel. We'll need it for larger deliveries anyway. She turned to Jacob. We'll replace the gate with something that honors the original design, but serves our new needs. By mid-morning, the farm hummed with unfamiliar activity. Construction teams measured and marked, their electronic tools beeping in counterpoint to the usual farm sounds. Sarah had taken the plans for the educational spaces to her teacher's study group, leaving Jacob to watch his familiar world begin its transformation. It's like surgery, Rachel said, appearing beside him as they watched the careful dismantling of the barn's eastern wall. We preserve what's vital while improving function. She held up the plans, now marked with additional notes. Your father's modifications from the 80s actually made this easier. He built with future change in mind. The comment eased something in Jacob's chest. Even 30 years ago, his father had been planning for a future he couldn't see. Maybe this transformation wasn't a break from tradition, but its natural evolution. Yet challenges mounted as the day progressed. The electrical system proved more outdated than expected. The soil composition near the proposed sensory gardens showed concerning test results, and not everyone welcomed the changes. Bill Henderson drove past twice, slowly, his expression dark as he watched the construction crews at work. "Change makes people uncomfortable," Catherine observed, following Jacob's gaze, "especially when it challenges their assumptions about what a farm should be." She was right. Already there were whispers in town. Some questioned whether the Miller farm would still be a real farm. Others wondered if city money would change the community's character. The plans on the kitchen table had seemed simpler somehow, before they began reshaping reality. The afternoon brought Michael Jenkins and his parents for a scheduled visit. Jacob watched as Catherine maintained her careful distance, but couldn't miss how her eyes followed her son's every movement. Michael moved with surprising confidence through the construction zone, his cane tapping out a path between equipment and materials. "The sound is different already," Michael observed, stopping near the barn. "More open, like the space is waking up." He turned his face toward the afternoon sun. "Will you tell me what they're doing? All the changes?" Jacob found himself describing the plans in detail, watching Michael's face light up at each new possibility. When he mentioned the modified tractor controls, the boy's hands clenched with excitement. "You mean I could actually learn to—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his expression said everything. That evening, after the crews had left and quiet settled back over the farm, Jacob sat with the plans one more time. The paper had picked up smudges and creases through the day, making them look more like a working document than an abstract dream. He traced the lines of the familiar buildings, now overlaid with annotations for their new purposes. Sarah found him there, adding her own set of notes from the teachers' group. "Jenny Cooper cried when I showed her the plans," she said softly. "Her daughter's in a wheelchair. She never thought she'd be able to experience farm life." Jacob nodded, remembering Michael's expression. The plans had become more than architectural drawings. They were becoming a bridge between what was and what could be, between limitation and possibility, between past and future. Outside, the half-dismantled barn stood silhouetted against the sunset. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more changes, more moments of doubt. But for now, Jacob could see in the plan's precise lines the shadow of something remarkable taking shape. Not just new buildings, but new hope. The old garden trowel had belonged to Jacob's mother, its wooden handle worn smooth by years of turning earth and planting dreams. This morning, he held it out to Michael, watching as the boy's fingers explored its contours, mapping the connection between past and present. "It's perfectly balanced," Michael said, testing the tool's weight, "and the handle, it's like it remembers every hand that's held it." They stood in the newly completed sensory garden, where raised beds waited for their first plantings. The morning air carried the mingled scents of fresh lumber, turned earth and possibility. Catherine watched from a careful distance, her presence becoming more natural with each passing day. "Mom used to say gardening is about faith," Jacob said, guiding Michael's hands to the prepared soil. "You plant seeds in the dark earth, believing in what you can't yet see." The boy's fingers deftly worked the soil, demonstrating a natural touch that made Catherine's eyes glisten. Around them, other students from Michael's support group worked at different heights and angles, each finding their own way to connect with the earth. Sarah moved among them, her teacher's instincts perfectly suited to this new role. "Feel how the soil crumbles," she encouraged a girl in a wheelchair who reached into a raised bed at perfect height for her seated position. "That tells us it's ready for planting." The garden trowel passed from hand to hand, each student taking a turn to experience its age-smoothed comfort. Jacob noticed how they handled it with increasing confidence, as if the tool's history lent them strength. "We'll need more tools," Catherine observed quietly, coming to stand beside him. "But there's something special about starting with this one. It carries memory." The transformation of Miller Farm was taking shape around them. The barn renovation was nearly complete, its century-old beams now supporting state-of-the-art adaptive equipment. The new greenhouses gleamed in the morning sun, their automated systems harmonizing with traditional growing methods. Emma had taken charge of the farm's social media presence, documenting each step of the journey. Her latest post showed the garden trowel alongside modern adaptive tools, bridging generations of agricultural wisdom. The response had been overwhelming. Messages pouring in from families across the state, asking about programs and possibilities. "Dad," Thomas called from the greenhouse entrance, "the sensors are showing weird readings again." Jacob smiled at his son's easy adoption of the new technology. Thomas had become the farm's unofficial tech expert, troubleshooting systems that would have seemed like science fiction a few months ago. The morning unfolded in a rhythm that was becoming familiar. Students arriving, volunteers gathering, work crews putting finishing touches on various projects. The garden trowel continued its journey, turning earth and opening possibilities. Bill Henderson, who'd been skeptical of the changes, stood at the property edge watching the activity. Jacob walked over, the old trowel still in his hand. "Never thought I'd see the day," Bill said, but his tone had lost its edge. "Got to admit, though, seeing these kids work in the land, even with their challenges, it's something special." Jacob offered him the trowel. "Want to help plant the herb garden? We could use an expert." Bill's weathered hands closed around the familiar tool. "My grandmother had one just like this." He paused. "My granddaughter's in a wheelchair. Think she could maybe visit sometime?" "We'd love to have her," Jacob said, watching another bridge build itself. By afternoon, the first seeds were planted, heritage varieties chosen for their sensory qualities. Fragrant herbs, tactile leaves, vegetables of varying textures. Michael worked steadily, his confidence growing with each careful placement. "It's strange," he said during a break, the trowel resting in his lap. "I thought losing my sight meant losing connection with growing things. But feeling the soil, understanding the plants through touch and smell, it's like discovering a whole new way of seeing." Catherine nearby turned away to hide her tears. Jacob pretended not to notice, instead focusing on teaching Michael how to gauge planting depth by feel. Sarah had arranged the students in pairs, those with different abilities helping each other, learning from each other. The girl in the wheelchair explained soil chemistry to Michael, while he taught her to judge seed spacing by touch. The old trowel moved between them all, its worn surface gathering new stories. Jacob thought about his mother, wondering what she would make of her garden tool, now serving such a broader purpose. As the day drew to a close, the newly planted gardens held the promise of future harvests. But the real growth was visible in other ways, in the confidence on students' faces, in the bridges building between old and new, in the community's gradually warming embrace of change. Catherine lingered after the others had left, watching the sunset paint the greenhouse glass in shades of possibility. "When I first proposed this project," she said, "I thought I was building something for Michael, but it's becoming so much more." Jacob handed her the garden trowel, letting her feel the smoothness of its handle, the weight of its history. "Mum used to say the best tools carry the wisdom of every hand that's held them." He smiled. "Maybe the best dreams do too." She turned the trowel in her hands. This woman, who could buy any tool in the world, yet understood the value of one worn smooth by generations of use. In that moment, she wasn't a billionaire philanthropist, but simply a mother, watching her son find his place in the world. The evening light caught the newly turned earth, rich and full of promise. Tomorrow would bring more students, more challenges, more opportunities to bridge past and future. But for now, the garden trowel had done its work, not just turning soil, but turning fear into hope, limitation into possibility, separation into connection. The storm came without warning, a late summer tempest that turned afternoon to twilight. As Jacob hurried to secure the greenhouse windows, a gust of wind tore through the barn's open doors, scattering papers and sending a forgotten picture frame crashing to the floor. He found it later after the students had been safely evacuated and the immediate crisis contained. The frame's glass had shattered, but the photograph inside remained intact, though dampened by the rain that had driven through the barn's temporary openings. 3 generations of Millers stood before the barn in its original state. His grandfather proud and straight-backed despite his age, his father in his prime, and Jacob himself as a teenager, all 3 wearing matching work shirts and serious expressions. "Jacob," Sarah's voice carried over the wind, "the greenhouse sensors are going crazy." The photograph would have to wait. He tucked it into his shirt pocket, its dampness seeping through to his skin as he ran through the strengthening storm. Inside the main greenhouse, Thomas wrestled with the new environmental control system. "The backup power's not engaging properly," he reported, fingers flying over the tablet interface. "We're losing temperature regulation." Catherine appeared beside them, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled from running between buildings. "I've got the engineering team on video call. They're walking us through the override procedure." Lightning flashed, illuminating the rows of adaptive equipment they'd installed over the past months. Each piece represented an investment, a promise to the community, and now all of it was at risk. The photograph pressed against Jacob's chest as he worked, its presence a reminder of other storms his family had weathered. But this was different. The Miller farm of the past had been simpler, its risks more straightforward. Now they had sophisticated systems to protect, vulnerable students to consider, and a whole community's hopes invested in their success. "The foundation board is asking for an emergency meeting," Catherine said during a brief lull, her phone glowing in the dim light. "They're concerned about liability issues with the student program." Another crack of thunder, closer this time. Through the rain-streaked glass, Jacob saw Michael and his father pulling up in their truck. He'd forgotten. Michael had been scheduled to start his tractor training today. The sight of them triggered something in Catherine. "He shouldn't be here," she said, her composed demeanor cracking slightly. "It's not safe with all this equipment." "I'll handle it," Jacob said, but as he turned to go, his shirt caught on a protruding bolt. The photograph slipped from his pocket, landing in a puddle of rainwater. He retrieved it quickly, but not before the water had begun to blur the images. His grandfather's face remained clear, but his father's features had started to run, like tears washing away the past. The storm raged for hours. They managed to save most of the sensitive equipment, but the greenhouse's western panel had cracked, and the barn's temporary covering had partially collapsed. Worse, word of the crisis had spread through the community's gossip channels, feeding doubts about the wisdom of mixing modern technology with traditional farming. "Maybe we tried to change too much, too fast," Sarah said that evening, as they assessed the damage. The photograph lay drying on their kitchen table, its edges curling slightly, the image forever altered by water damage. Catherine sat with them, her usual poise replaced by evident exhaustion. "The board's concerns aren't just about today's damage. They're questioning the entire model, suggesting we should have built a purpose-built facility instead of adapting an existing farm." Jacob studied the photograph, focusing on his grandfather's still clear image. The old man had lived through the Dust Bowl, had seen farming transform from horse-drawn plows to mechanical harvesting. He'd adapted, but never lost sight of what mattered most. "Look at this," he said, pointing to something in the background. Of the photo that the water damage had actually made more noticeable, a group of local children watching the photographer. Even then, this place was more than just a farm. It was part of the community, Michael's father called to report they'd made it home safely, but added that some parents from the support group were expressing concerns about the program continuing through storm season. The foundations of trust they'd built seemed, suddenly, as fragile as the greenhouse's cracked panel. As night fell, the storm's fury finally began to fade, leaving behind a farm that felt somehow changed. The photograph had dried, but would never be the same, much like their vision for the future, baptized by reality, altered but not destroyed. Catherine stood at the window, watching the lightning flicker on the horizon. I should have anticipated better backup systems, should have insisted on more rigorous safety protocols. Her voice trailed off, and Jacob recognized the sound of a parent questioning their choices. The photograph sat between them on the table, its water-damaged surface reflecting the kitchen lights like distant stars. 3 generations of Millers seemed to watch them, waiting to see how this latest challenge would be met. Outside, the wind still whispered around the damaged barn, carrying echoes of both what was lost and what might yet be saved. The letter surfaced during the post-storm cleanup, discovered in a water-damaged box from the barn's old storage loft. Its envelope had yellowed with age, but the Morgan family's return address was still clearly visible. Jacob might have set it aside with the other salvaged papers if Catherine hadn't caught sight of it and gone suddenly still. "That's my mother's handwriting," she said softly, reaching for the envelope with uncharacteristically uncertain hands. The letter was dated 20 years ago, addressed to Jacob's father. As Catherine unfolded it, her usual composure faltered. "I never knew she wrote this," she whispered. "Never knew she reached out. Dear John Miller, I'm writing about my daughter Catherine. She's 16 now, and pregnant. She won't tell us who the father is, but that's not why I'm writing. Yesterday, I found her sitting by your fence, watching your son Jacob working in the fields. When I asked why, she said, because they know what matters. The Millers understand about growing things. We're sending her to stay with relatives until the baby comes. She wants to give it up for adoption. Says she's not ready to be a mother. Wants the child to have a better life than she can provide. But she made me promise something. She wants the baby to grow up near your farm, where things grow in their proper time." The letter trembled in Catherine's hands. "The Jenkins family," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They weren't random choice for Michael's adoption. My mother arranged it all, kept her promise even after she couldn't finish." Jacob remembered that summer vaguely. A teenage girl sometimes visible at the property edge, watching their work. With unusual intensity. He'd been too absorbed in learning the farm from his father to pay much attention. "Your mother knew," he said quietly. "All these years, she knew why you chose our farm for this project." Catherine squared her shoulders, trying to recover her business-like demeanor, but the letter had cracked something open. "I told myself it was purely logical. Your location, your community standing, your experience with local youth programs. I had spreadsheets, demographic studies, feasibility reports." She smiled sadly. "But really, I was that 16-year-old girl again, knowing in my heart where hope grows." The discovery of the letter's existence spread through the community like ripples in still water. Some, like old Mrs. Morgan, now in the nursing home, filled in missing pieces of the story. She remembered the quiet teenager who'd spent hours in their garden, talking to the plants because they didn't judge. But not everyone found the revelation heartwarming. At an emergency foundation board meeting conducted via video conference, one member spoke sharply about emotional decision-making and compromised objectivity. Catherine's perfect composure cracked again. "You think I didn't research every possible location? You think I didn't spend years developing this model?" Her voice carried 2 decades of carefully contained emotion. "I chose Miller Farm because it's the right place. For all the right reasons. That my personal history confirmed what the data showed. That's providence, not weakness." The letter had started to circulate among the project's critics too. Bill Henderson's wife brought it up at the grocery store. suggesting to Sarah that the whole program was built on sentimentality rather than sound planning. But then Michael himself spoke up at a community meeting, not knowing the full story, but feeling the tension in the air. "Before I came to Miller Farm, I thought blindness had taken away my future. But here," he gestured at the space around him, which he'd learned to navigate with confident familiarity. "Here I'm learning that limitations are just opportunities to grow differently, like plants finding new ways to reach the light." His words shifted something in the room. Catherine, sitting quietly in the back, pressed her hand to her heart, where the letter now lived in her jacket pocket. The storm damage was still visible across the farm: broken windows, scattered equipment, muddied paths. But as Jacob watched the community's reaction evolve, he realized that the letter had done more than reveal a hidden past. It had transformed their story from a wealthy outsider's charity project into something more profound, a mother's 2-decade journey to create meaning from loss, to turn young pain into mature purpose. That evening, Catherine stood with Jacob by the repaired greenhouse, the letter back in its envelope, but its truth now part of their shared history. "I should have told you from the beginning," she said. "Should have trusted. Some truths need time to grow," Jacob replied, thinking of seeds that wait for the right season to sprout. Like everything else on a farm, the broken fence post lay across the property line like a fallen soldier, its weathered wood split clean through where the delivery truck had struck it. But it wasn't the physical damage that made Jacob's chest tighten as he stood in the early morning mist. It was the spray-painted words across the remaining section: "Keep Miller Farm local." Sarah found him there, staring at the vandalism. "Bill Henderson's boy admitted to it," she said quietly. "Says his father's been talking about how we're destroying traditional farming values." The fence post had stood for 40 years, part of the boundary his father had established with a handshake and the simple words, "Good fences make good neighbors." Now it served as a symbol of the community's deepening divide. Word of the vandalism spread quickly, amplified by social media. Emma showed them the growing online debate, longtime residents lamenting the loss of real farming, advocates for disabled rights defending the program, Catherine's Foundation board members expressing renewed concerns about rural resistance to change. The broken post seemed to draw people throughout the day. Michael's father stopped by, awkwardly offering to help repair it. "Not everyone feels the way Bill does," he said. "What you're doing here, what you're letting Michael do, it means everything." But an hour later, 3 other local farmers drove past slowly, their expressions hard as they surveyed the modified equipment visible from the road. One called out, "Selling out ain't the same as moving up, Jake." Catherine arrived for the afternoon board meeting to find Jacob still working on the fence, his hands blistered from pulling out the broken post's deep-set base. "The board's talking about relocating the program," she said without preamble. "They're worried about liability, about community resistance, about negative publicity." She stopped, watching Jacob test the soil where the new post would go. "They don't understand what we're building here." "And what exactly is that?" The voice came from behind them. Bill Henderson, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Because, from where I stand, you're turning good farmland into some kind of fancy playground. Those machines, those computerized systems, that's not farming, that's my son learning to be useful again," Matthew Jenkins interrupted, appearing with Michael. "That's children finding hope. That's the future, Bill, whether you like it or not." The broken fence post between them seemed to gather their shadows, stretching them across the disputed boundary between old and new. More vehicles were arriving. Curious neighbors, foundation representatives, local press drawn by the morning's social media storm. Sarah emerged from the house, carrying the old photograph that had been damaged in the storm. "Look at this," she said, holding it out to Bill. "See those children in the background? That's you, Bill, and that's your sister Mary before her accident. The one that put her in a wheelchair." Bill's face tightened. "That's not fair, Sarah." "No," she agreed. What's not fair is denying other children the chances Mary never had. This farm has always been about community, always been about helping. People grow. Catherine stepped forward, her corporate poise cracking. Move the post, she said suddenly. Not back where it was. Move it further in. Jacob looked at her sharply. What? The property line. Move it in 10 feet. Make it a shared space. She turned to Bill. Your granddaughter in the wheelchair. Give her that strip of land. Let her plant whatever she wants there, tend it however she thinks best. Traditional methods, adaptive equipment, her choice. The broken fence post lay between them like a challenge, its splintered end pointing toward an uncertain future. Bill stared at it for a long moment, then at the damaged photograph in Sarah's hands. Mary used to love watching things grow, he said finally, his voice rough. Never got to do much of it herself. After, the gathered crowd held its breath. Even Michael seemed to lean forward, sensing the weight of the moment. Jacob picked up the broken post, feeling the years of weather and wear in its grain. Sometimes, he said quietly, a broken fence can make better neighbors than a good one. The first vegetables from the adaptive garden lay arranged on the farm stand table like precious jewels. Tomatoes grown by Michael's careful hands, squash tended by children in wheelchairs, herbs nurtured by students with various abilities. Each piece represented not just food, but proof of possibility. Emma had set up the display with artistic care, mixing traditional farm stand elements with signs in both print and braille. From our garden to yours, read the banner above, with photographs showing the diverse group of students who had contributed. To the harvest, these tomatoes, Michael said, holding one gently, letting its weight rest in his palm. I can tell by the feel that they're perfectly ripe. His fingers traced the contours with the same precision he'd used to plant the seeds. Months ago, Bill Henderson's granddaughter Lucy rolled her wheelchair up to the table, proudly adding her own contribution, a basket of bell peppers from the shared border garden where the broken fence post had once stood. The peppers were technically on the Henderson side of the new boundary, but she'd used some of the adaptive tools from Miller Farm to tend them. Grandpa says these are the best peppers he's ever tasted, she announced, her face glowing. He says it's because they were grown with extra care. The morning sun caught the dew on the vegetables, making them shine. Local customers began arriving, drawn by Emma's social media posts about the first harvest. They moved through the display with a kind of reverence, selecting produce and listening to the students explain how each item had been grown. Catherine stood back, watching Michael demonstrate to a younger blind child how to feel for a tomato's ripeness. Her composure wavered only when the boy's mother tearfully whispered, I never thought he'd be able to do something like this. The foundation board members, who had come for a final evaluation, walked through with clipboards, but their formal assessment forms seemed to lose importance as they watched the interactions. One of them, a stern-faced woman who had been most critical of the program, stopped to talk with Lucy about her pepper-growing techniques. The thing is, Lucy was explaining, the adaptive tools help me reach and tend the plants, but the growing itself, that's just nature doing what it always does. Grandpa says growing food is about patience and trust, and he's right. The plants don't care if you're in a wheelchair. They just care that you show up and do the work. Sarah had arranged for her elementary school students to visit. They moved through in small groups, wide-eyed at seeing their classmates with disabilities confidently explaining agricultural techniques. The children's natural acceptance of difference seemed to affect the adults more than any formal presentation could have. Jacob found himself by the shelf, holding the day's special display, mason jars of tomato sauce made from Michael's first harvest. The recipe was his mother's, but Michael had adapted it, using his enhanced sense of smell and taste to adjust the seasonings. We'll need more jars, Catherine said, joining him. The way these are selling, people aren't just buying sauce, they're buying into the vision. She was right. The harvest stand had become more than a point of sale. It was a proof of concept. Every vegetable, every herb, every preserved item demonstrated that their dream of an inclusive agricultural education center wasn't just possible, it was already bearing fruit. Bill Henderson himself appeared as the morning crowd thinned. He moved through the display, slowly examining each item. When he reached Lucy's peppers, he picked one up with careful hands. "You know," he said to no one in particular, though several people stopped to listen. "Farming's always been about adaptation. My grandfather switched from horses to tractors. My father learned irrigation techniques. Maybe," he glanced at his granddaughter's beaming face, "maybe this is just the next step in that evolution." As if to underscore his words, Michael successfully made change for a customer using a specially marked cash box, while Lucy demonstrated the adaptive picking tool she'd used for her peppers. The foundation board members had put away their clipboards, instead helping students bag purchases and share growing tips. The morning's harvest hadn't been large by traditional standards, but as Jacob watched the last tomatoes and peppers find their way into appreciative hands, he understood that they were harvesting something far more valuable than vegetables. They were harvesting hope, possibility, and the first fruits of genuine change. The new sign stood at the entrance to Miller Farm, its surface catching the morning light. Miller Community Farm and Learning Center, in raised letters that could be read by both sight and touch. Below, smaller text added, "Where all abilities grow." The sign's wooden frame had been crafted from the old fence post, a transformation that seemed to capture the spirit of everything they'd accomplished. Jacob ran his fingers over the tactile letters, remembering Michael's suggestion to make the sign accessible to everyone. The brass plaques beneath listed the founding partners, the Miller family, the Wells Foundation, and in a touch that still moved him, the Henderson-Jenkins Community Coalition. "It's perfect," Catherine said, standing beside him. She'd arrived early for the official opening ceremony, dressed more casually than usual in clothes suitable for farm work. "Though I still think we should have added your father's favorite saying about timing." "It's there," Jacob smiled, pointing to the reverse side of the sign, visible to those leaving the farm. "The land knows how to wait. Question is, do you?" The transformation around them seemed almost miraculous in the clear morning light. The barn had become a state-of-the-art adaptive learning facility, its historic beams now supporting a network of accessible walkways and modified equipment. The greenhouses hummed with activity, their automated systems working in harmony with traditional growing methods. Sarah emerged from the education center, once their old farmhouse kitchen, now a bright space where students of all abilities could learn both traditional farming wisdom and modern agricultural science. "The first tour group is arriving," he called, "and you'll never guess who's leading it." Bill Henderson's voice carried across the parking area as he introduced the farm to a group of visiting educators. Lucy sat beside him in her wheelchair, adding her own expertise about the adaptive programs. The change in Bill had been perhaps the most remarkable of all. From skeptic to advocate, his gruff manner now softened by genuine enthusiasm. "See these raised beds?" they heard him explain. "My granddaughter designed the height variations. Got herself a scholarship to study adaptive agricultural engineering, if you can believe it." Michael appeared with his own group of students, a mix of sighted and blind children eager to learn his techniques for sensory-based farming. He moved with complete confidence now, his white cane unnecessary in spaces he knew as well as his own heart. The sign caught a glint of sun, drawing Jacob's eye again. He remembered the old Miller Farm sign it had replaced, weather-beaten, traditional, speaking of a past that had seemed immutable. But like everything else here, tradition hadn't been discarded. It had been enhanced, made more inclusive, allowed to grow into something richer. Catherine watched Michael demonstrate how to judge soil quality by touch, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The careful distance she'd maintained had gradually shortened over the months, though she still respected the boundaries of his relationship with his adoptive family. But now they shared something beyond biology, a vision made real, a purpose discovered. "The foundation board sent their final approval this morning," she said quietly. "We're already getting inquiries about replicating the model in other communities. But they all want to come here first, to see where it began." The sign stood as testament to that beginning, its dual-purpose design declaring that this was a place where differences weren't just accommodated, they were celebrated, where limitation became possibility, where community meant everyone. As the first official visitors gathered for the opening ceremony, Jacob thought about all the signs that had marked Miller land over the generations. Each had reflected its time, its purpose, its understanding of what a farm could be. This new sign, with its inclusive design and repurposed materials, spoke not just of change, but of growth, the kind that, like the best crops, took time, patience, and faith to reach fruition. The leather-bound guest book lay open on the Welcome Center's front desk, its pages filled with stories that went far beyond simple signatures. "Today, my daughter drove a tractor for the first time," read one entry. "Never thought I'd see that." From her wheelchair. Another, "Finally, a place where my blind son can learn a trade with dignity." And beneath that, in careful braille dots alongside printed text, "Here, I'm not disabled, I'm just a farmer." Jacob often found himself drawn to the book during quiet moments, reading entries that traced the expanding ripples of their work. Today, a fresh page displayed a message from a delegation of agricultural educators. "What you've built here isn't just a farm, it's a blueprint for the future." Catherine joined him at the desk, setting down her tablet showing the latest expansion. "Proposals. Have you seen the new entries? 3 more states want to implement our model." The guest book had been Emma's idea, a way to document the human impact of their program. But it had become something more, a testament to possibilities, a record of transformations, both large and small. A recent entry caught Jacob's eye, written in Bill Henderson's distinctive scrawl. "Watched my granddaughter teach a blind kid how to gauge pepper ripeness today. My father would have said it wasn't real farming. He would have been wrong." The book's pages held other victories. Notes from medical professionals documenting improved physical and mental health outcomes. Letters from agricultural schools revising their accessibility policies. Stories of families finding hope they'd thought lost. Michael's entries appeared regularly, each one brailled alongside his careful handwriting. "Taught my first solo class today. Developed a new technique for training vining plants. Helped design modifications for the seed planting equipment." His growing confidence was visible in the increasingly complex achievements he recorded. Sarah had started using the book in her teacher training programs, showing how inclusive agriculture could transform education. "When we remove barriers," she'd written, "we don't just help those who face them, we enrich everyone's understanding of what's possible." Lucy Henderson's college acceptance letter was pasted onto one page. Her planned thesis topic clearly stated, "Adaptive Agricultural Engineering, the Miller Farm Model." Beside it, a note from her grandfather, "Sometimes the best traditions are the ones we're brave enough to reinvent." The day's newest entry came from a Veterans Rehabilitation Program coordinator. "Your wheelchair-accessible greenhouse design will be implemented at VA centers nationwide. Thank you for showing us that healing can grow from the ground up." Catherine lingered over a photo someone had attached. Michael teaching a group of young children, his hands guiding theirs as they learned to feel the differences in soil composition. Her own entry, made months ago, was simple but profound. "Sometimes the seeds we plant take unexpected paths toward the light." The guest book had become more than a record. It was a living document of transformation, each page adding to the story of how one farm's change of purpose had sparked a movement. Its leather cover, worn smooth by countless hands, held within it the proof that dreams, properly tended, could yield harvests beyond imagining. The hand-carved bench sat at the farm's entrance, crafted from the last of the old fencewood. Jacob had worked on it during evening hours, carefully incorporating textures and curves that spoke to both sight and touch. Along its back, he'd carved his father's words about time and seasons, the letters raised so they could be read by fingers as well as eyes. It was here that he found Michael and Catherine sitting together on the morning of the farm's first anniversary. They weren't talking, just sharing the space comfortably. Michael's hands occasionally tracing the carved words, while Catherine watched with quiet joy. The distance between them had gradually diminished, like morning mist burning away in sunlight. "The wood remembers," Michael said as Jacob approached. "I can feel where the fence posts split, but now it's smooth, part of something new without losing what it was." The bench had become a symbol of their journey. Much like the boy who'd once sat hungry by the roadside had become a confident young man. Its weathered wood told the story of transformation, of finding new purpose while honoring old roots. Catherine's hand rested near Michael's on the bench's surface, not quite touching but sharing the same space. Their relationship had evolved into something unique, not quite mother and son in the traditional sense, but connected by something deeper than circumstance. "The next group of students arrives tomorrow," Michael said, his fingers finding the carved date of the farm's founding. "I'll be teaching them the new hybrid planting technique we developed. Some of them are coming from the VA program." The bench had been positioned to catch the morning sun, just as Michael had once positioned himself by the roadside. But now, instead of seeking warmth alone, he was helping others find their way to growth and purpose. Through the open barn doors, they could hear Sarah leading a tour, her voice carrying clearly, "And this is where tradition meets innovation, where we prove that the old wisdom and new methods can work together, just like our students do." Catherine smiled at the sound. "When I first came here with my grand plans and corporate presentations, I thought I was bringing change to Miller Farm." She ran her hand along the bench's smooth arm. "I never expected the farm to change me instead." The morning light caught the bench's carved words, casting shadows that seemed to dance across its surface. Like the farm itself, it had become more than its original materials, more than fence posts and old wood, more than past or present. It had become a place of rest, of connection, of shared understanding. Jacob thought about that first shared lunch, about all the moments that had led them here. The bench would remain as testament to their journey, offering welcome to future generations who might need to find their own way to growth and purpose. It was more than just a seat at the entrance to a successful program. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important harvests grow from the simplest acts of kindness. The photograph captured that perfect moment when dawn's first light touched the Miller Community Farm and Learning Center's buildings, casting long shadows across ground that had supported 3 generations of growth. Emma had taken it from the old oak tree's vantage point, her camera catching the exact instant when past and future seemed to merge in golden possibility. In the image, Michael stood in the foreground, confident in his space, one hand resting on the adaptive tractor controls, while the other held Catherine's newest project proposal. Behind them, Jacob and Sarah watched from the hand-carved bench, their posture relaxed, at peace with the changes their leap of faith had brought. The photo would grace the cover of an agricultural education journal next month, but this morning it sat on the Welcome Center's desk beside the guest book, drawing visitors into its story of transformation. Like the farm itself, it spoke of both tradition and innovation, of endings become beginnings. "Ready for the second year?" Catherine asked, joining Jacob as he studied the image. Their relationship had evolved into a partnership that went beyond business, grounded in shared purpose and understanding. Through the window, they could see Bill Henderson giving Lucy's first-year agriculture class a lesson in traditional farming wisdom, his teaching seamlessly incorporating the adaptive methods that had once seemed so foreign. The boundaries between old and new, between ability and adaptation, had blurred into something richer than either alone. The morning sun reached the same angle captured in Emma's photograph, creating a living echo of that moment. Michael's voice carried from the teaching garden, instructing a new group of students with the quiet confidence that had become his hallmark. The land, he told them, doesn't care about what you can't do. It responds to what you can, to the effort you invest, to the heart you bring to the work. The photograph caught all of this, not just the physical changes to the farm, but the spirit of what they'd created. It showed a place where barriers became bridges, where limitations transformed into possibilities, where one simple act of sharing lunch had grown into a harvest of hope for countless lives. In the end, Jacob thought, his father had been right about timing, about waiting for the seasons to turn. Some seeds needed time to grow, some dreams needed patience to flourish, and some mornings, like this one, arrived bringing the certainty that everything had unfolded exactly as it should.